"The wickedest man in the world is dead," proclaimed the British sensational press with relief, when Aleister Crowley died on December the 1st, 1947. According to Crowley, though, he isn't finished yet. 1,000 years from now, Crowley once wrote, the world will be sitting in the sunset of Crowleyanity. The self-aggrandizing Crowley called himself the Great Beast 666, and many other tongue-in-cheek apocalyptic titles. The reaction from the shocked public seemed understandable. Crowley had dedicated his whole life to a feverish, uncompromising search for meaning. He experimented with magical cults, invented his own religion, and it is said drove some of his followers insane with eerie rituals. Crowley has been charged with sodomy, murder, and ritual rape. He is said to have advocated drinking the blood of infants. According to Crowley's diaries, he performed this sacrifice about 150 times per year, from 1912 to 1928, so it's hardly likely he actually murdered infants. Popular belief now is that he was referring to ritual masturbation, and not literal human sacrifice. Crowley proclaimed that he had studied white and black magic, but had never practiced black magic, and had always written about it in terms of strongest condemnation. This presentation is about Boleskine House, on the shores of Loch Ness, which was built as a hunting lodge in the late 18th century. Archibald C. Fraser, who served as a British consul in Tripoli and Algiers, commissioned Boleskine House, although it was not finished until 1809. Having outlived all his sons, the house would later pass to his grandson, Archibald T. F. Fraser, and the estate remained in the ownership of the Fraser family until 1894. In 1899, British poet, mountaineer and esotericist Aleister Crowley purchased Boleskine for £2,000, which was twice the market value at that time. Boleskine, he believed, provided a more favourable location for his occult practices. He wished to conduct a series of rituals from the Book of Abramelin, a mid-15th century manuscript of a Jewish mystical provenance that would become central to Crowley's new religion, Thelema, which he believed would help him make contact with his holy guardian angel. When Crowley first moved into Boleskine House, he found it necessary to write a letter of complaint to the local vigilance society. "Prostitution," Crowley wrote, "is most unpleasantly conspicuous in the area." An officer of the society was duly sent to investigate and, deeply puzzled, reported that they could find no evidence whatsoever of prostitution. Crowley wrote back, "Conspicuous by its absence, you fools." Before moving to Boleskine, Crowley had been living in rooms in Chancery Lane, London, where he had fashioned 2 temples for his occult explorations, one white and lined with 6 huge mirrors, the other black with an altar supported by the figure of a black man standing on his hands, and with a human skeleton that Crowley would feed from time to time with blood, small birds and the like. The idea, he explained, was to give it life, but I never got further than causing the bones to become covered with a viscous slime. Aleister Crowley bought Boleskine with the express purpose of performing an elaborate magical ritual there. Part of this ceremony involved summoning demonic entities and binding them with the goal of removing their negative influences from the magician's life. This is a very dangerous ritual to attempt because, regardless of what any magician tells you, demons cannot be controlled. Crowley's notoriety and the ritual is where much of the present-day Boleskine legend comes from. Legend has it that the house was built on the site of a 10th century Scottish kirk or church, which had burned down, killing the entire congregation trapped inside. In an ancient publication compiled from parish archives, called An Account of the Kirk of Boleskine, it is recorded that in the second half of the 17th century, a minister, one Thomas Houston, whose intricately carved stone is still to be seen in the graveyard, was called from his manse by locals, when a notorious local wizard raised the bodies of the dead. Minister Houston had the most difficult task of laying them to rest again. One traveller kept a journal describing the graveyard at that period. After dinner we took a walk to see the kirk of Boleskine, the poorest edifice of any kind I ever looked upon, as is also the manse. The churchyard is quite open without any walls, where you see plenty of human bones above ground, and the floor of the kirk is overspread with them. But how much I was shocked to hear that sometimes the dogs are seen carrying the human bones in their teeth. The actual magical ritual which Crowley attempted to perform at Boleskine had nothing to do with black masses or black magic. It is known as the Abramelin operation, taken from the book of the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage, a famous grimoire dating back to at least the middle of the 15th century. Crowley seems to have become aware of the ritual from the 1897 translation of the book by occultist Samuel Liddell Mathers. one of the founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which Crowley had joined in 1898, before falling out with most of its members, including Mathers, a few years later. The house was considered perfect for the ceremony due to its relative seclusion, because, as Crowley put it, one must have a house where proper precautions against disturbance can be taken. This being arranged, there was really nothing to do but to aspire with increasing fervour and concentration for 6 months towards the obtaining of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. The house also had the necessary opening to the north, where Crowley built a terrace adorned with fine river sand, a place where, as proof of the ritual's progress, the footprints of the spirits were to appear. Crowley considered this building to be Thelemic Qibla, a kind of esoteric Mecca or a focal point for mystical energy, making it a powerful centre for performing intense magical rituals. When the preparations had been set, Crowley began the ritual, citing in his personal diary a promise not to offend God or work ill against his neighbours. The purpose of performing the lengthy and intense Abramelin ritual was for the magician to communicate with his holy guardian angel or higher self. The mage must summon and mentally conquer the 12 kings and dukes of hell, including Lucifer, Satan, Leviathan and Belial, and bind them, thereby gaining command of them in his own mental universe. The ceremony has an introduction which states that nobody should perform it. Unfortunately for Crowley and those around him, the Abramelin rite seemed to have succeeded mainly in summoning demons, or the Abramelin devils, as Crowley calls them. Crowley was said to have summoned 115 entities. During the rituals there were reports of a heavy, oppressive atmosphere at Boleskine. Dark, eerie shadows filled the house. Fierce winds blew through the rooms despite calm weather outside, and strange figures were seen in the area. Historian Francis King said this about the book: "The sacred magic of Abramelin expresses its doctrine and the technique which depends from it more clearly and more consistently than any other grimoire. The machinery of the cosmos is seen as operated by demons under the direction of angels. Man is seen as standing between the angelic and the demonic, each human being having attached to his or her soul a malevolent demon and a holy guardian angel. The object of the processes taught in the sacred magic was the obtaining of the knowledge and conversation of this holy guardian angel. Once this had been done, the magician could control the demons who run the universe, raise the dead, heal the sick, find great treasures, and even fly. By this it is presumed astral projection." These rituals apparently required 6 months of preparation, as well as celibacy and abstinence. Crowley was called away to Paris by his Grand Master, the head of the Golden Dawn, before completing the spells. Shortly after Crowley left for Paris, the locals began to murmur about the dark black clouds hanging in the skies around Boleskine House, many residents going far out of their way to avoid travelling near the building. Upon his return to Boleskine, Crowley immediately felt the changes in his estate. Even his protégé had fled the property while he was gone. His description of what transpired during the ritual can be found in his diary. Besides these comparatively explicable effects on human minds, there were numberless physical phenomena for which it is hard to account. While I was preparing the talismans, squares of vellum inscribed in Indian ink, a task which I undertook in the sunniest room in the house, I had to use artificial light even on the brightest days. It was a darkness which might almost be felt. The lodge and terrace, moreover, soon became peopled with shadowy shapes, sufficiently substantial as a rule to be almost opaque. I say shapes, and yet the truth is that they were no shapes properly speaking. The phenomenon is hard to describe. It was as if the faculty of vision suffered some interference, as if the objects of vision were not properly objects at all. It was as if they belonged to an order of matter which affected the sight without informing it. One day I came back from shooting rabbits on the hill and found a Catholic priest in my study. He had come to tell me that my lodge-keeper, a total abstainer for 20 years, had been raving drunk for 3 days and had tried to kill his wife and children. I got an old Cambridge acquaintance to take Roche's place, but he too began to show symptoms of panic fear. The demons and evil forces had congregated round me so thickly that they were shutting off the light. It was a comforting situation. There could be no more doubt of the efficiency of the operation. Despite these clear signs that dark forces were abroad, Crowley continued to work on the ritual, going so far as to deny visits from friends for fear of their safety. One story concerns a local butcher who called at the house for the meat order, while Crowley was involved in the lengthy, difficult ritual of the Abramelin. The butcher's incessant ringing of the bell broke Crowley's concentration, and, irritated and frustrated, he hastily scrawled the meat order on the nearest piece of paper, which happened to have a spell written on the back. Shortly afterwards, when the butcher was cutting up the meat for Crowley's order back at his shop, he apparently lost concentration and sliced all the fingers off his right hand with the cleaver. Other stories tell of the unexplained disappearance of Crowley's housekeeper and a local workman who went out of his mind after being tormented by the dark spirits conjured up by Crowley's rituals. Crowley didn't spend much more time at Boleskine, and he sold the property in 1913. It is said that the demons invoked during the sessions were never banished, and strange things have been happening at Boleskine House ever since. Boleskine was then registered in the ownership of Dorothy C. Priestley, née Brooke, and plans were introduced in 1926 to make significant alterations and extensions to the former hunting lodge. However, these plans never came to fruition. The house passed through a series of owners after Priestley, being purchased by Foyers Hotels Limited in 1944, then to David Shirley Crichton Simpson in 1946. Who, a year later, sold the property to a John Robert Rankin Fullerton. Boleskine House next came into the ownership of Mary Verity Grant, otherwise known as Mary Lorraine. It is alleged that whilst at an art exhibition in Inverness, Mary Lorraine met Molly Lorraine, unrelated. The latter was fascinated by Boleskine's mysterious lore and wanted to buy the property. When she met Mary, who shared her surname, it was too strange to call it a coincidence, and she convinced her husband Dennis Henry Lorraine to purchase the property in 1963. Dennis Lorraine was a career conman. It was Dennis Lorraine who got Hollywood actor George Sanders, which Wikipedia incorrectly states was George Raft, involved in a scam which would become known as the Great Sausage Scandal. No one seems to know the exact timeline, but the scam was that Dennis would set up a company called Loch Ness Foods and claim he was rearing pigs on the site, except that no pig farm existed. And this is how he managed to dupe George Sanders into getting involved. By the time the law had caught up to Lorraine, he had sold Boleskine House and fled to the United States. A certain Major Edward Grant and his wife Mary were next to take possession of Boleskine. The Major later committed suicide in the former bedroom of Crowley in 1965. Anna McLaren was his housekeeper at the time and had an eerie premonition of the tragedy. She was alone picking vegetables from the garden when she heard a single gunshot from the house. When she went to investigate, there was no one in the house. She put the incident to the back of her mind. But 7 days later, at around the same time of day, her employer shot himself in the head. She recalled, "When I came up and went in the front door, there was this little bone lying there, and they had this little doggy, Pickywig was his name, and I said, 'Where did you get that, Pickywig?' because they had this huge fridge and there was nothing in it. I took the bone and I just threw it. I went in and found him with most of his head blown off. Afterwards I saw Pickywig playing with the small bone. Police told me later the bone was part of the Major's skull." The property was then sold to Halbert Kerr, who ran Boleskine as a guest house from 1967 to 1971. Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page purchased Boleskine House in the early 1970s. driven by his long interest in the life and work of Aleister Crowley. He was just one of the rock stars of the era influenced by Crowley, whose views on sex and drugs appealed to those kicking out against the strictures of previous generations. Page is quoted as saying that he related to Crowley's system of self-liberation, in which repression is the greatest sin. It's like being in a job when you want to be doing something else. Page went on to claim bad vibes ran through the 18th century property, where he maintained the head of an executed man, believed to be Lord Lovat, who fought with the English during the 1745 uprising, could be heard rolling around the floor. The bad vibes were already there, he said in an interview with Rolling Stone in 1975. A man was beheaded there, and sometimes you can hear his head rolling down. I haven't actually heard it, but a friend of mine who is extremely straight and doesn't know anything about anything like that at all, heard it. He thought it was the cats bungling about. I wasn't there at the time, but he told the help, "Why don't you let the cats out at night?" He also said that at Boleskine it's the atmosphere that counts and not the legends. When I go there with friends, writers and other creative people, I find that it crystallizes things for them in a very short time. Of course it causes a lot of upheaval for some people as well. Page spent money on restoring Boleskine, including commissioning the artist and occultist Charles Pace to paint murals inspired by those on the walls of Crowley's Abbey of Thelema. Scenes from the Led Zeppelin film, The Song Remains the Same, were filmed in the grounds. But in the 19 years he owned the house, Page spent no more than a few months there. Instead, he put it in the care of his friend Malcolm Dent. Over the years, Dent would report numerous strange occurrences and noises in the house, including passing what he described as the most terrifying night of my life, when he was awakened by what sounded like a wild animal snorting outside his bedroom door. Dent opened the door to find nothing, but added, "Whatever was there was very, very evil, and I was very, very frightened."
So arriving at Boleskine and discovering, one, that it has a history and a past, and a pretty weird past at that. Two, that there are certain things still going on there. Crowley, when he was raising the various demons and spirits at Boleskine, failed to banish all of them back from whence they came. And that one or two residues had been left behind, and he actually mentions that he had left this one bricked up, in, as he put it, in the center of Boleskine House. The room I was in that night was the center of Boleskine House.
Another friend who stayed at the house awoke one night claiming she had been attacked by some kind of devil. Doors would be slamming all night. You'd go into a room and carpets and rugs would be piled up. Another regular occurrence was that the back door, inside doors and kitchen doors would suddenly spring open as if someone was running through them, even on calm days. "We just used to say that was Aleister doing his thing," Dent said. Nonetheless, he stayed on at Boleskine, happily raising his family there, until Page sold up in 1991.
You had to acknowledge that somebody would come in from outside and have some incredible freaky time while you were there, and you saw it and witnessed it, and they were responsible for it because of their heads. House was good at that. House responded to, the Boleskine House responds to people.
The house then passed into private hands, but in 2015 it was almost completely destroyed by a fire in a suspected arson attack. In 2018 it was put on the Buildings at Risk register for Scotland. At the same time, a paranormal research group, Highland Paranormal, conducted an investigation at the property, but were unable to detect any supernatural activity. The following year it was purchased by Kyra and Keith Reddy, who established the Boleskine House Foundation as a charitable trust. A week after the foundation purchased Boleskine House, a second fire broke out in yet another suspected arson attack, collapsing the roof of the property. Scottish Highland councillors have approved plans for the restoration of Boleskine. The building is to be reinstated as a Category B listed building, alongside the construction of 10 holiday lodges, as part of an ambitious rebuild worth more than £1.2 million. The Sunday Times report in December 2020 alleged that the founder of a secular conservation charity that has pledged to turn a landmark building into an educational centre admitted her true intention was to spread the spiritual doctrines of a notorious occultist. But trustees of the Boleskine House Foundation vehemently denied the claims. The foundation has insisted its intention is to turn Boleskine into a centre dedicated to promoting Highland history and conservation. There is no intention for the house to become a place of pilgrimage or ritual, nefarious or otherwise. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. I know this subject may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I decided to go ahead with it anyway because, without a doubt, Aleister Crowley has left his mark upon the world. And most people say you either love him or hate him. I have neither love or hate for him, but he's just an absolutely fascinating subject, and I have read about him over the years. There are many lies and fantasies made up about him, and he is much maligned, and sometimes deservedly so. He was absolutely terrible with people when it came to relationships. He was a failure when it came to that, but in other aspects he was so intrepid, so adventurous, and what an amazing spirit, really. He made a lot of mistakes. As you saw during the video, his daughter Lola never spoke to him. She didn't want anything to do with him. He just seemed to have an appalling manner when it came to the loved ones in his life. I guess he was very egotistical, and I can't forgive him for cruelty to animals, sacrificing animals and stuff. That's a big no-no with me. But the other aspects I'm interested in, and I'm prepared to look at the other side of the coin. The fact that he never gave up all his life. He really believed in what he was doing. I might cover Aleister Crowley more in depth one day, but this was supposed to be about Boleskine House, but Boleskine House without Aleister Crowley. Boleskine House is the personification of Aleister Crowley. Without him, it would be just a little lodge on the banks of the Loch Ness. One author described Aleister Crowley as one of the last great romantics. History and the press did not see him that way, but in a way he was. Everything was dramatic about him. When he went about, he wanted to be seen, he wanted to be known, he wanted people to be appalled and shocked and shudder when he walked by. And he achieved that. Apparently he thought very little of politicians, so I can certainly commend him on that. And he had a very sharp wit, a very critical tongue when it came to politicians, and they used to be quite frightened of him. They would avoid him because he was actually very good with the words, and he didn't make any bones about what he thought of them and their pretensions. So I like that, certainly, about his character. I think he lived in a bit of a dream world. You know, when you've inherited a lot of money, as he did, and he took quite a lot of drugs, I think he lived in a sort of perpetual mystical state. If I do cover the life of Aleister Crowley, I will really have to try and sort through all the lies and the fiction and the fantasy and try and present a very fair account, if that's possible. Because Aleister Crowley invented many lies himself, to bolster this magician image. I do encourage you to read about him. I'm not interested in black magic. I'm not part of any magical lodge or anything like that. I just find from an historical point of view, it's absolutely a fascinating subject. He is a fascinating subject. Unfortunately, he became addicted to heroin because of his asthma. A doctor had given him morphine to alleviate the symptoms of asthma, and from then on he became addicted to heroin, which led to his gradual decline. You get to a certain age and you can't go climbing mountains and getting exiled from different countries. At some stage it comes to an end. So he had quite a bit of a sad end, but I did read. I said I keep coming back to Aleister Crowley. I'll read about him one year and I'll leave it for a couple of years and I'll come back to him. But at the guest house where he was staying in his final years in Hastings, the married couple who ran the place, they said he was charming, witty, intellectual, and they loved having him around, and nothing like the monster that the press portrayed. My question is, if you inherited Boleskine House, would you stay in it? Would you go and live there, or would you sell it immediately? I'm not sure. I think it'd be lovely to live on the banks of the Loch Ness. Whether there is anything to the rumours that the place has a supernatural being chained, in another dimension inside the house, I don't know about that. I think I would stay. I think I would go and give it a go. The only thing that would put me off is all the sort of crazies who want to come and visit, make a pilgrimage to Boleskine House. And I'm going to read an article from the newspapers online in a minute about one such stalker who keeps coming back and causing problems. That would put me off actually staying there. I don't think I'd do it. What about you? I'm asking you, would you stay there, even for a night? Whether this was just more of Mr. Crowley's hype, I don't know. But people have said they've had experiences there. And also it is suggested, and I'll show you the articles too online, it is also suggested that the Loch Ness Monster was one of these extra-dimensional beings that Mr. Crowley summoned because the sightings of the Loch Ness started at around about the same time. So that's very interesting. Yeah, so about the Loch Ness Monster, this is courtesy of Week in Weird. They have published an article about, did Aleister Crowley accidentally summon the Loch Ness Monster? I won't read all the way through it. I will leave the link. Remind me if I haven't, and I'll put it up. But there's quite a few other articles online if you're interested in further research about that the sightings seem to occur they apparently started to occur after the failed ritual. So check that out. There were also lots of articles about this guy who has been stalking the ruins of the former Aleister Crowley home on the shores of Loch Ness. Poor guy, I know he's a homeless drug addict and he has mental problems, but he keeps coming back. Apparently he even attacked the property owners, the people who are restoring it at the moment. That would be, for me, the worry of living there. And by the way, remind me too, I'll put the link up for this article. This is courtesy of the Press and Journal. That would worry me about living there. And I wonder if, I'm not saying it's him, this homeless guy, but I wonder if someone like him is actually setting the fires. As I detailed in the story, there were 2 arson attacks. Is it somebody who is obsessed with the place and wants to be there, wants to be around there, but cannot live there because he doesn't have the money, or he or she? That would worry me, because who's to say it won't happen again, that another fire won't claim the property? I just don't think it's worth it, really. The place is too infamous now to really have a peaceful life there. But I wish the people who are running it the very best of luck. I hope they don't have any further distractions. And here is one last article, courtesy of the Free Library by Fairlex. It's about terrified BBC call exorcist to House of Satan. Horror after insect attack on film crew. So apparently the BBC were filming a documentary at Boleskine House and had repeated equipment failures and experienced strangely similar nightmares about Crowley. You know, during the video it is mentioned that a paranormal team investigated and didn't find any evidence of paranormal phenomena. That doesn't mean that there's not something there. A lot of these paranormal teams don't have a psychic bone in their body. They're just using electronic equipment. That doesn't really tell you whether the place actually has a presence in it. It's people who are of a sensitive nature can pick these things up. Some people pick up on these things and other people do not at all, but it seems that this film crew did. So the things were happening like showered with glass when lights exploded, fuses burned out and camera stands fell over, ghostly fogs and insects. Apparently occultists claim Crowley put a curse on anyone who dared to pry into his private life, even after his death. Oh my goodness, I hope Aleister's not after me now. Well, I've been fair. I don't think he can complain about that. So midway through the shoot in the graveyard, the crew was attacked by an infestation of insects. It said that Crowley and another guy in Paris were sending magical spells to each other. Yes, apparently when he had a fallout with Samuel Liddell Mathers, they were so furious with each other that they were sending psychic attacks through the astral plane, different types of, I think Crowley, all his bloodhounds died or something like that. He blamed it on Mathers and vice versa. I can't remember the whole story now, but I did read that. They were using magic to slap each other around. Very interesting. Also, I will leave the link for that. I hope I've made sense today in the ramble. I've got a bit of a brain fog today. I don't know, you know, sometimes if you wake up, you've had a really good night's sleep, you're refreshed, your head's clear. Today is not one of those days. I didn't have such a good sleep. So apologies. I'm going to leave that and I think I'm going to go now. Let me know if sometime in the future you would like me to cover Aleister Crowley in more depth. Tell me what you think about Boleskine House too. Do you think there's anything there, or is it just a load of codswallop? I'm interested in your feedback. On that note, I'm going to head off. I've rambled enough. Take care. God bless. Until the next time. Bye bye, my friends.